DeEtta, thank you for coming in. You just have such a glorious background on contribution and impact, and it's just really marvelous. I can see the different elements of your career from your schooling to the different communities you're part of, and in leadership to this DeEtta Jones and Associates, what you're doing as founder and CEO. uh, it's a long time in coming, and the world really needs more and more people like yourself. And you definitely are a role model and a template for others to follow. So I recommend the audience follow your work. I just amazing. So I really appreciate you coming in and spending time with me because you're really busy. You got a lot on your plate, and yet you're carving out some time so we can have a chat. So again, I'm grateful to you for that. So thank you.
I am the one who's honored, Stephen. Thank you so much. Thank you for, speaking of busy, for making space for this conversation. I've been looking forward to it. And I also have just been really admiring your work for a long time. So excited for us to have this conversation.
So one of the questions I ask in my interviews, and it's because my audience is really diverse, and my interviewees like yourself are leaders, right? So people are curious, what are the 2 to 3 inflection points in your life that made this wonderful person that you are today? And it could be when you were like 3 or 5, or could be a friend or a teacher or somebody in your family. And, it doesn't matter, but that sort of narrative is really interesting. So what shaped you?
Thank you for asking. I even from my bio, it's evident that I believe in the power of story, and that it's important to not just describe kind of where I am, but how I got to be here, which I think gives an important context, but it also allows for kind of relevance with different audiences. So the path that I took was informed by so many of those different stepping stones. I think that when I think about the inflection points of my life, it's easy for me to imagine a number of them. One of them was college. I'm a first generation college student, and that was a big deal for me. And I know that there are a lot of people who go to college and they have a really profound developmental experience. But for me, coming from a family where my father was one of 18 children from a very rural part of Arkansas, where he literally grew up picking cotton. And my mother is one of 10 in the United States who grew up very, very poor, and often very marginalized because of her religious experiences and beliefs. For me to be able to somewhere in me figure out that I wanted to go to college, and that was a place that I would thrive, it was kind of against the odds that was a choice that I would have made, and also that I actually got accepted. But I felt like that was an incredibly important developmental experience. The other was, I would say, establishing, and I'm glad that you mentioned this, a relationship with an amazing mentor. This also happened while I was in college, but this is a person who, as with many mentors, they kind of tap you and say, I see something in you before we see it in ourselves. And at that point in my life, I just didn't have much perspective. I had grown up in pretty significant poverty. And so I just didn't really have perspective about what the possibilities or potential was. But I knew that I had interests that were unexplained still, and that I knew were there, but I didn't exactly know how to unfold them. And so she really created wonderful, not just space for me to learn and to grow, but also provided opportunities for me to develop skills and establish relationships and confidence, that important skill of confidence that I wouldn't have otherwise had. And then the third really important, I think, developmental experience for me was having a son, becoming a mother. When I became a mother, everything shifted. I had been doing work around equity, diversity, and inclusion for the entirety of my life at that point, which was almost 20 years by the time I became a mother. I had been doing work as an activist, and then working with different organizations. I had been traveling the globe. I had been changing policy. I had been mediating complaints of discrimination. I had done all of these things, which brought me a tremendous amount of purpose, I thought. And then I became a mother, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is what purpose means. And I I thought that I was always a caring person who tried to be in the service of others and in the service of the world, but I didn't really understand profoundly what that meant until I became a mother. The last thing I'll say about that piece is that that piece about being a mother became really, really intense in 2020 when George Floyd was murdered in the United States and when a racial equity movement exploded, not just in the United States, but across the globe. And I have a Black son who is large for his age. He has locks in his hair. And we were in COVID. But even riding his bicycle around our quiet little neighborhood was something that I could not allow for him. I was too nervous for him to actually be seen by others and potentially mislabeled. And so, as a person who's always tried to think about justice and space for others, being a mother really dialed it in a much more profound way than any of the other previous experiences, even thinking about my own identities. So, thank you for asking that question.
That's a really compelling narrative. I mean, if I sort of add in my head with your parents, it's like one of 28 children, right?
No.
So you must have a lot of cousins and things like that. And what did they what did they think about your journey, right? Because you said you were the first out of your family to go to college, right?
I
So
was on both sides.
wow. So
Yes.
so what impact is that having in your family?
It's interesting because I there was a point in time when I felt quite disconnected from my cousins because my path was so different. And I wasn't really sure why. I was just pulled in a direction that I couldn't quite explain. I was like, I'm just not where I'm supposed to be. But over time, and as I kind of go back and go to family reunions and reconnect with, or kind of have deeper conversations with cousins, I realized that they have been watching me this whole time. And they give me, which is, I had no idea. I'd always felt like, oh my goodness, I'm the black sheep. I was doing something that was not okay. It was different than everyone else. They were probably judging me, but actually they were watching me and they were proud for me, and they were cheering for me. And they often even used me as inspiration for their own children. And I appreciate that so much, being able to get that feedback from them, because that's all we want in this world, not necessarily to be a role model, but to allow our choices to have a positive impact. That's all I want, at least, is for me to know that the choices that I'm making are potentially having a positive impact on others, which brings me tremendous joy.
Yeah, and I guess what it will do is open up possibilities. I know, I mean, I taught for many, many years, and I remember teaching a mother who didn't have access, and then she went to college and she graduated, and she when she graduated, her kids were saying, "Wow, if mom can do it, I can do it," kind of thing, right? So it really acts as you mentioned, inspiring for the family to say, you know what, let's do that too, or generationally, it can have this epigenetic effect, and I think that's quite interesting and marvelous. And you mentioned this mentor. Are you still in touch with the mentor? And is what's what's happening there?
So I am incredibly fortunate that my mentor is someone who's still in my life. And it's funny because from the day we met, I knew she was my mentor, and she still says, "No, no, no, I'm just your friend. I'm not." It's like too much pressure to call herself my mentor. But there are a number of people like that, and I think a lot of us have a number of people who are our mentors at different points in life and in different ways. At that point in my life, when I first met her, her name is Barb, and I have a number of other people who fall into similar categories who are also brilliant in their ways. But I was maybe 17, 18 years old. As I mentioned, I was first generation. I was going to school at an institution that was predominantly white. The percentage of Black students was particularly small. And I wasn't one of the few Black students who was on an athletic scholarship in that specific institution, which was very much the case for most of the Black students in that institution. So I just didn't have any structure. I didn't have anyone kind of showing me how to figure things out. And Barb, met me and got me involved in what was at that point a new experience called the President's Leadership Program. She had spoken with the president of the university about creating a leadership development program for undergraduate students that really allowed for, I think, the foundation of understanding how equity, diversity, and inclusion is part of all of our lives' journeys. And so the curriculum was very much around interculturalism and also around leadership and even kind of psychology and organizational behavior, helping us think about how it is that we might step our careers into our lives into what would transition into our careers. So I participated in that experience. And within 6 months or so, the first semester of completing the program with her, she asked me if I would co-facilitate subsequent experiences. And so I became a facilitator. And then I started thinking about how I could enhance or contribute uniquely to the curriculum. And that's how I really started my career, kind of designing and facilitating learning experiences for people with a strong interculturalist foundation. And she created, that just opened up so many doors. I think one of the most brilliant parts about our relationship also was that she was very different from me. She is a white woman who identified as lesbian, and I grew up straight, biracial, and never knowing that I knew anyone who identified as not straight because of the religion that I grew up in. And it was also very, it was not okay to be, to be gay at that point in my life based on what I understood from my religious upbringing. So to have this beautiful relationship with someone who allowed me to develop a real rapport with her and also allowed me to explore my own biases and develop relationships across differences that I had not yet experienced really also created a very solid pathway for me and the work that I continue to do after that. And yes, we stay in touch to this day, and I love her tremendously, and I'm so thankful. I always encourage people, find one or many mentors in life.
So, I mean, does the university sometimes reach out and say, "Can you speak to our class or graduating class or something?" Because you're a star, right?
I don't know if I'm a star, but I'm passionate, and I went back maybe 10 years ago at this point, and we started a foundation in Barb's name to allow for the ongoing kind of growth and nurturance of the President's Leadership Program specifically, but with a lot of the principles that she brought as a practitioner. It was just an incredibly high bar. And I go back every once in a while, but I've continued to be in the field of higher education for now about 30 years, where I'm really fortunate to spend a lot of time at a lot of different universities. I don't spend as much time with students anymore. I've had experience as a faculty member at a couple of different universities, which I've very much enjoyed. But over the last 20 years, probably, I've been working more with faculty and administrators because there's still a lot of work to be done there around the ways in which higher education is transforming, as well as other industries.
Yeah, it's interesting that you were the first in the family to go into higher education, and then you end up teaching within that ecosystem. And as you mentioned, this foundation to give back as well. And so how did your career then progress? So you get your BA and your master's, and then and you've done graduate studies as well, other graduate studies with other schools, including an MBA from Johns Hopkins. So how did that manifest into different elements and stages of your progression?
Yeah, it was my undergraduate major was psychology. I was like, what do I do with this? I wasn't a straight A student, which was necessary in order to continue with a master's degree in psychology. So I was trying to figure out how to continue to build on the career path that I'd started as an undergraduate. And I went on to pursue a master's degree in higher education administration, thinking that I would stay in higher education. It was a wonderful experience. And there was a lot of emphasis on absolutely on equity, diversity, and inclusion, but also on things like kind of a lot of things that people would learn when they're in a counseling field about human behavior, and about emotional well-being, and things that really have served me well over time. And after that, I went on to be the director of a human rights office for city government. And this was another amazing mentor who helped me prepare for, and then also nominated me for that position. Being the director of the Human Rights Office for the city government at the time was really important point in life, because it was right after Matthew Shepard was murdered. So I was living in Fort Collins, Colorado. Matthew Shepard was a young man who had gone out to a bar in Wyoming. And after leaving the bar, people from the same bar found him on the road and beat him to death and left him hanging on a fence to die in Wyoming for being gay. And that was the point in time that I was doing a lot of my activism work. I was spending a lot of time doing education at the universities, but also in the communities. And I also was given the opportunity to be the director of the Human Rights Office. And so going in at that specific time allowed me to really step into a space where I could have used my privilege as a straight person and say, what is it that we need to educate ourselves around related to hate crimes that exist in our communities? How is it that we pass legislation that makes these hate crimes punishable against the LGBT community, hate crimes against the LGBT community specifically punishable at the hate crime level? And then what other provisions can we put into play? And I was able to spend some time, significant time doing that, as well as other work related to education in the local community. And then after that, which was so profound and so important, and then after that, I took a position in Washington, D.C., working for an international not-for-profit that focused in higher education. And so I was able to spend a lot of time at that point really starting to understand how equity, diversity, and inclusion and leadership shows up globally, and how it's different in different parts of the world, and how important it is for us to, as much work as there is in the United States, where I'm from, and I'm still wrestling with what does all this mean, to start thinking about globally, where is it that we can start being connectors? Where is it that we can start building bridges? Where is it that we can start thinking about the fact that the whole world is asking for equity? And after about 10 years in that international leadership role, I started DeEtta Jones and Associates, which is now been quite a long time. I'm going on 20 years. Just 1 year from now, we'll be at 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's remarkable. DeEtta Jones and Associates, and you're really one of the top DEI or EDI companies in the world, consulting firms in the world. But in between, you've done books, and you've designed tons of global leadership programs and development programs. You have your Culture Road podcast. You get Inclusive Managers Toolkit, top selling courses that you put out through different organizations, and so on. So what was that like then? You became an entrepreneur, right? So here you have this narrative of first to college, very large family. People are watching you, right? Because you're like a model, a role model, and a template to guide, a North Star, sort of a beacon as well. When people would say, gee, I want to do that, and I want to learn from what DeEtta's doing. And then you start this company. I mean, that's a big step, right? So describe that journey as an entrepreneur.
It's a labor of love. I'm sure you can imagine as many entrepreneurs as you speak with and as much work as you've done over the years, but it's difficult. It's difficult being, for me, I am in love with the content. I'm a lover of ideas. I like to learn. I like to think. I like to create. And that's different than being, it's a different skill set than being a really effective manager and having a really solid set of kind of business acumen related skills that will allow me to build a really effective company. And so for me, it's been a constant learning journey, and also an opportunity to make sure that I'm practicing what I preach. I go out of my way to hire people who represent a variety of diverse identities. I look actively to hire people of color. I look actively to hire women or people who identify as LGBTQ. I really believe that I have an opportunity to try to create space for different people, different voices, different backgrounds and experiences that may have been overlooked otherwise. And also to show what it looks like when people from diverse identities come together and really make magic happen and really deliver above and beyond what our clients are expecting and in ways that allow for breakthroughs. But what it also means is that I've continued to constantly develop my skills related to how to organize a business, how to manage a business, how to really be an effective manager and leader of people. And that continues to change. The world that we're living in, the definition of effective leadership is different than it was 30 years ago when I got my MBA or when I was even teaching or studying leadership. Now, thankfully, Barb taught me the style of leadership that is very much the style of leadership that we're talking about now, right? It's really about facilitative leadership and creating space and making sure that we're thinking about how power dynamics influence how people show up in a space. And so thankfully, that's been part of how I have been kind of trained and inoculated into the idea of what leadership should be and how I should behave. But it also means that, you know, showing up in that way on a regular basis when there are so many fires to put out, when the world is changing significantly, and when the topic of equity, diversity, and inclusion continues to shift. And so our business model has to continue to be looked at and thinking about, are we aligned with the best practices and helping to lead those best practices in the world? There's a lot of balls in the air on a regular basis, but it's been something that I would never do differently. I've absolutely loved every minute of it, and I am excited about where the next steps of the journey will take us.
So how does that work then? Let's say a company out there or some organization, it could be the nice thing about EDI, it applies to everybody.
Yep.
Doesn't matter what sector you're in, whether it's education, industry, business, government, they can use your services. So how does that happen? They hear about DeEtta Jones and Associates, and then they contact your team and they say, you know what, we want to know how to better utilize or change our policies or practices about EDI. Is that how that works? And then you lead them through and they create policies and so on? Or what's that onboarding process? How do you get these clients? And then what is their journey where they feel, yes, we have something that we believe in and that we can institutionalize across our organization?
Yeah, so we typically, when clients come to us, the good thing is that 95% of the clients who come to us, people who call us and say, we'd like to figure out how to work together, are not people who could care less about equity, diversity, and inclusion. They're not people who are saying, this is ridiculous, it's a fad, or, you know, we can't talk about this. People call us because they care, they're interested, they're incentivized. Some of those calls, maybe 20 or 30%, are kind of risk management. People saying, oh no, something bad just happened. We just had a lawsuit or a threat of one or a class action suit, or we just had one of our employees put something out on social media that we wish we would have gotten in front of, but now we need to clean up. And so they call us and say, what are some of the things that we can do to comply and also to proactively show before any other action takes place that we are working our best at making this happen, at making something meaningful happen. Other clients come to us and say, you know, we are having a hard time recruiting, or our retention numbers just aren't where they need to be, or our engagement surveys are not particularly solid, and we know that we need to do something. And so we work with those kinds of companies to create a strategy and say, what is it that you are looking for? And not just kind of, you have to figure it all out. We definitely guide and say, here are some of the best practices, and here are some ways to create a strategy that shows that you are committed, creates a clear and compelling story and path, and allows for some immediate kind of success stories as well as long-term sustainable action. And then the third kind of client comes to us and says, what we want is professional development for our employees. We know that the world is changing. We know that there's a lot of unevenness in the way that we use language in our organization, in the way that our managers are experienced by our employees. And what we want is to create organization. We want to build our organizational capacity around equity, diversity, and inclusion, but we want to do it in a way that positions equity, diversity, and inclusion as part of the lifeblood of the work that we do, not a silo, right? A vertical. So help us do this in a way where all of our managers understand that this is just part of being a good manager. It's not a whole separate job, a job description. It's part of being a good manager. How do we do that? Or how do we do that in a way that allows all of our employees to very practically understand when we talk about unconscious bias, practically speaking, how do we do the knowledge transfer and apply it into the work that we do on a day-to-day basis that will allow us to make sure that we're building our skill set, but also that we'll have some stick-to-itiveness. And so those three kinds of clients contact us and we say, let's walk through what it is that you want. Let's figure out what your metrics are and we'll help you do that. And then let's figure out a plan of action that is right-sized for you and starting where you are, including things like assessments and intake assessments, organizational readiness, and all of the sorts of things that really allow for a meaningful experience that's customized for the client, but also that gets them moving right away. So just contact us. We're up for it all the time.
And I see this in the news, right? I mean, some kind of flare up occurs within a company or an organization, and oh my God, they have to address it. And they've got to they're not really ahead of it. It's already happened, but they got to prevent it from just exponentially growing. So they'll bring in your group or consulting firm to say, help us manage this crisis and get a little bit ahead of it. Even though we're behind, but let's now get in front of it so it doesn't continue to grow. And then you have others that realize, wow, there's this big change in the world and the sentiments are changing. Gen Z, which are those born post 1997, alpha generation. And that attitude means we're going to have to change how we're addressing our employees and our clients and so on, because we have to be in step with the changing demographics and sentiments around the world. And then you have others who are just their interest in professional development across the entire organization to be very aware of EDI and making sure, again, that they're proactively addressing this, and they want it, making it part of their DNA, throughout the organization. So really, you're hitting it across all the entire needs that are out there. Did I capture that right, with my understanding?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing that you've described in all places kind of leads to a similar point. And that's something that we more recently have rolled out. And it's really about the fact that this is an ongoing new reality, right? So the way that we think about this is that a one-shot kind of episodic training or professional development or one-off topical approach is not enough. There's so much to learn all the time. I just came back a couple of days ago from Portugal. I'm on my way today to New York. Next week, I'm going to Japan. And in every single one of those contexts and more, the conversation is different. Right. And so for me to take a half day unconscious bias training and expect or mandate that all of my managers do that and expect that, okay, we're good to go now, is ridiculous. There's so much to learn. And like learning anything, like that 10,000 hour idea, like learning anything, it takes practice over time. And it takes us being able to not just have access to knowledge, right, and resources, but to be able to apply it in a context that is meaningful to us, to get feedback on how that is working for us, right? That knowledge transfer, is it working well? And also to be able to do that in a community environment where we are validated that this is actually a meaningful endeavor to other people, not just to us and to our organizations. And so Culture Road was born from that idea that even though we have really robust professional development offerings, and so do a lot of wonderful places, that what we need is a path that we can pursue together as people who are, the way we describe it is people who are drivers of cultural transformation. And that doesn't mean just people who are doing equity, diversity, and inclusion as your day job. It means people who are members of employee resource groups. It means anyone who manages other people. It means people who are responsible for procurement and meeting supplier diversity goals. It means people who are doing marketing and advertising, right? All internal corporate communications, all of those things, right, require people to have not just heightened sensitivity and awareness, but sophisticated skill sets that they can apply in the context of their organization and in pursuit of shared organizational goals. And that's the reason why Culture Road exists, is to help really shift from consulting here or there with some specific metrics to really building kind of muscles within a community of practice over time. And in a world that continues to change and evolve, so that it's not just isolated to my organization or your organization, but where we can share ideas across companies and organizations, across industries, and also across geographies.
So I can see this path, right? In 2005, you found DeEtta Jones and Associates, which is this top-ranked EDI company and consulting firm in the world. And then in 2021, you form Culture Road, which is this community of practice where like-minded people can share. But it's across all of the different aspects of an organization, as you mentioned. It could be in the sales and marketing. It could be in distribution. It could be in HR. It could be in purposeful leadership. Every aspect of an organization has to be sensitive and aware of EDI practices and how to maintain those practices. And of course, the flavor of that will change depending on the part of the world. You mentioned you're going to be in New York and Japan. That cultural road perspective is localized too. So what I'm hearing then, it's a global community, Culture Road, formed in 2021. Do you have some kind of certification as well then, so people can say, I'm a certified practitioner, and being able to teach this, or to ensure that you're maintaining some kind of standard of EDI practice?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Absolutely. Yes, we absolutely do. And there's two different layers, right, to our certification. One is at an individual level, to make sure that individuals have the skills and tools associated with doing the work, right, including kind of self-assessments, not just how do I show up in this space, but what are some of the ways in which I can make sure that I am impacting others in ways that are consistent with my own values, right? That my intentions and my impact are aligned. And also that I have a path for ongoing development and growth that I can follow, and also that I can be measured on. So I can hold myself accountable, and also so that I can be incentivized to continue to learn and develop skills, and also so that I can help others in a way that allows people to understand that I've taken really solid that I have really solid understanding of multi-partial facilitation skills, for example, and constructivist listening and dialogue, and some of those very specific skills associated with being a very seasoned practitioner. But then there's also, at the organizational level, the opportunity to understand how are we going, and that kind of assessment allows for not just the organization to look at policies and practices and representation goals, et cetera, but it also allows for leaders and managers, particularly, to understand how it is that they are contributing to and helping to drive where it is that we're going in an organization, and seeing their relationship to an organization's pursuit of our goals. So yes, the certification applies at several different levels, and it definitely, in my opinion, at least, it's really important for the world of equity, diversity, and inclusion to have just as much focus on kind of aspiration as we do on risk. So there's a very interesting statistic that came out from a relatively recent study, 2 years ago, study that was a combination report that was done by Harvard Business and the Society for Human Resource Managers. It was a global study. And what it showed is that over 70% of organizations have a person who is responsible for equity, diversity, and inclusion accountability, but less than 12% have any incentives associated with pursuit of equity, diversity, and inclusion goals. And humans are more intrinsically motivated to pursue an achievement. We want to know, what is it that we're going toward? Not just what are we avoiding, not just what pain are we avoiding, but what is the aspiration? What does it look like when we're doing it well? And right, so for me and for us, it's really about how do we establish some examples of what does it look like when we're doing it well, from representation goals and some of those really important metrics that need to exist, to behavioral expectations that allow people in organizations to start being incentivized to make some of the behavioral adjustments that are going to be really necessary for also becoming the kinds of organizations that people want to work in and the kinds of organizations that people want to put positive social messaging about.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating. You really have thought this out really, really well, and then from this, you've authored books and designed, you know, over a dozen global leadership development programs. You've got the Cultural Road podcast now, so I see the context of the podcast versus the community, and now I understand the Inclusive Managers Toolkit, this sort of top selling course, because that could be part of this community building, but also from a individual standpoint and an organizational standpoint, right? Because it scales.
Yep.
Anytime you have a course, it'll scale. And so you've seen all of this activity, came out in November, this ChatGPT, and now it's ChatGPT Plus, which is taking this, what we call generative AI, and the next generation called GPT-4 has come out, and it's included within the syndicated or the subscription version of ChatGPT. Here, Microsoft has included this in all of their products, and that's their program. It's already in Bing AI, but it's going to be in their Office suite. It's a great tool that would actually help in what you're doing. I can see that. Have you started planning and thinking, you know what? Why don't we have some kind of conversational system that can assist that's part of the Inclusive Managers Toolkit or something like that, or as an add-on? Are you thinking in that space now?
Absolutely. I love that you mentioned that. And it's interesting. I haven't figured out exactly exactly the how yet, but have been having really amazing conversations over the last couple of months about the possibilities. And the opportunity with equity, diversity, and inclusion and artificial intelligence is to try to make more objective the decision making, right? So everywhere that we've tried over the years to debias systems and to create more objective ways for our processes and procedures to result in outcomes that are equitable, we fail whenever humans touch it, and humans touch it in so many places. And so if there's a way for AI to help us really drill down on creating more objective ways of thinking about kind of blind interviews, or looking at policies in ways that allow for us to be able to very quickly scan a huge body of policies. Many of our clients are very mature organizations and they're multinationals. And so to think about the number of policies that exist that otherwise would have to be kind of reviewed by a human or in some other very laborious way dealt with, and if AI can help do that and at least flag opportunities for intervention, let alone actually suggest those interventions, there's tremendous opportunity there.
It just reminds me of a keynote that I was doing back in, I guess about 2018, 2017, where I was mentioning the application of AI, and JP Morgan was spending, and I may be wrong here because I'm just sort of going from memory, but I think it was something like 360,000 hours of timing contract compliance. And by applying AI, they were able to get that down to, let's say, under 2 minutes. So that this would be an application, but that was like 4 or 5 years ago, right? So, and I'm now brainstorming. There's a company called Being AI. I could see this applying to, it's a startup, but the founder has a great background, and the background would align with what you're trying to do. So I think what they're doing, they would have to modify their avatar, and it's driven by this generative AI, this chat GPT kind of technology. And in fact, they recently asked me to do an introduction to Microsoft. So I think what you're doing would apply to them. There's another company called DID. I think what they're doing will apply to what you're trying to do. They've got a API that you can access if you have a development team, and then an API is a application program interface. It's a way of an enterprise or a company or an organization like yourself if you have coders on board or you have contract coders, you can use these little interfaces that you call on the internet and write your own application that's tailored to your requirements. And so that's an API, application program interface. And so that's something they've released, and then they've got a version that's for consumers as well. So, but that's more for people to, yeah, as creators, they can, work with it. They got a creator studio. But there's other companies out there too, and I think so. The tech is there.
Yep.
It's just a matter of your group saying in a programmatic way, we want to take some of that, maybe hire a few coders to, embed this. Or if you have a startup like Bean AI, just contracting them and say, can you tailor what you're doing to what we're doing? And then you're like 22nd century tech, right? And where you can
Love
have a guide. How did you get it? So going beyond that now, you're also part of YPO. How did that journey start? And who is YPO, and how did you get involved with YPO and so on?
This has been a really beautiful, very much more recent part of my life and journey. I came to it through my partner, who was a member when we met, who's this absolutely beautiful soul. And the two of us together on our journey are looking for ways to live more impactful lives. He comes out of an impact space. I also have always looked for ways to try to have impact in the world. And we attended an impact summit together recently, which is where we had an opportunity to talk more. And YPO it's a large organization. Of course, it's global, 33,000+ members, people who are doing really amazing work, very entrepreneurial, always looking for ways to have a positive impact on the way that we think about business, the way we think about relationships, the opportunity to really develop important relationships across different regions, collaborate in ways that allow for impact and breakthroughs to happen that wouldn't otherwise exist. But we were able to be part of an impact group where we spent some time really thinking about opportunities for looking at impact around a variety of different areas. The specific area that I was invited to contribute to is the People Action Network because of my background. And so we're spending time, and I'm still relatively new to this organization, but really thinking about how it is that we create more well-being in our organizations and in our communities. How do we look at different dimensions of people from an equity point of view and from a health and well-being point of view, and create space for more of those positive realities? So really exciting work with really impactful people. The thing that I love the most, and I think you mentioned it earlier when we were talking about kind of the speed of getting things done and the ability to scale, to be able to have people who are all entrepreneurial, who are working kind of out of love and passion. It's not like anyone has a lot of discretionary time. Everyone in YPO is an entrepreneur, has a lot going on, or is leading a large organization. They have significant home and life and family obligations. But in addition, find time to pursue things individually and collaboratively that allow for innovation, that allow for things to happen that wouldn't otherwise happen, or through slow bureaucratic experiences alone. And that's what I really love. I love being in a space where people are like, no, something has to be done. And I have the means and the passion and the desire to make it happen. And to come together in a space like that really makes me proud to be a part of that organization.
And I guess I'll give the audience some context. So YPO is an organization founded in 1950, so they've been around a long time. And it was really a successful CEO looking around and saying, gee, I don't have any peers I can talk to, because, when I going through this journey, so he founded this organization. And it's peer-to-peer, no matter where you are in your sort of your career or your organization maturity. And it's very private. though there's some public aspects, as you mentioned, the Global Impact Summit. Some people were posting on LinkedIn about this summit. And as you mentioned, 33,000, I think there's like 450 chapters, like over 140 countries. You have to meet minimum requirements to be a member. And they also include partners like spouses and children called YNG or YPO Next Generation as part of this broader community. And they do something like what, close to 10 trillion in annual revenue, employ 22 million, and so on. So it's a notable organization. And you mentioned the impact side. So this organization or members within the organization are becoming really passionate and committed to impact and purposeful business and purposeful capital and innovation and so on. So, and you're part of that. So you're on the board of the People Action Network. So the impact side has these different components, and a network is typically more than 750 CEOs and leaders. So you're on the board of the YPO People Action Network, which is focused on the people side. And it's interesting to hear about your journey and how you want to continue the contribution. You're also on the executive committee of the National Small Business Association. You're on the Forbes Business Council. How did that come about? And then I want to ask you about, you're on the board of the Perspectives Charter School and what that means. So can you talk about those other elements?
Well, the National Small Business Association was an important opportunity for me to, as a small business owner, to make sure that there is voice and perspective that I help to shape. And so there is a lot of emphasis on policy. There's a lot of emphasis on kind of collectively, what is the message that we want to send for federal consideration, for allocations. What are some of the demographic information that, what demographic information needs to be kept current and taken into consideration as laws are being passed or as resource allocations are being decided. So that was an important space for me to be present, especially understanding the power, not just of small businesses in the United States, but also the growth of Black and woman-owned small businesses in the United States. I felt like it was really important for me to continue to be part of the voice associated with those parts of the overall economy. Related to Forbes, that's been wonderful because I've been able to do a couple of articles here and there. I regularly get asked to share my ideas or perspectives, but I also have access to really wonderful leaders who are doing interesting things in different places. And so very much like the National Small Business Association and like YPO, being able to find at least a couple of different networks that allow me to talk to other people who are doing things that intersect with and potentially, hopefully, extend what I'm doing and extend my reach, extend my understanding, extend the ability for me to learn and grow is really important. And that's where that's come in. And then Perspectives, I will happily share, is a charter school on the south side of Chicago. And the reason that's important to me is because I'm from Chicago. And I understand in the United States, Chicago has had a very difficult history. It's been very segregated for many, many generations. And my father actually came to be in Chicago many years ago as a very young person when so many Black mothers were sending either themselves, their husbands, and or their sons to the up north to get away from the really atrocious things that were happening in the Deep South, which is where my father's family is from, especially the lynchings. And so the kind of Emmett Till story is very similar to the kinds of thing that my father was trying to escape, and which is how, so much of my family ended up in Chicago, like so many other Black families. But in the Chicago area, even though there has been a really amazing amount of business leadership that's come from especially the Black businesses in the United States, that Chicago has a really wonderful concentration specifically of people who are in finance, like Melody Hobbs, or people like President Obama or Oprah Winfrey or Michael Jordan. I mean, there's really interesting people who have been in Chicago. There's a really wonderful, rich network there, but there's also extreme poverty. And there is this legacy of gang violence that has just been plaguing the South Side of Chicago for many years. And so for me, continuing to find ways to give back and stay connected to an issue that for some reason has not been able to be solved, and where there is tremendous brilliance, opportunity, and need for people who just care to show up and do right, was a really, it's really important for me to stay connected with them. So even though I've moved, I now live in Miami and I travel quite a lot. I continue to have a very active relationship with Perspectives. I'm on the board. I'm one of the most kind of I'm a very loud cheerleader for them, and also for the work that can and should be done by caring people who really want to keep ourselves invested in communities.
So I have two final questions. One is, where do you see yourself in 2 to 3 years? And then maybe a longer time horizon, let's say 5 to 10 years. And then the last question after that is your final recommendations to the audience. So first of all, where do you see yourself in 2 to 3 years, and then 5 to 10 years?
So personally, I am very easily imagining myself not having Miami as my primary home base. Even though I love Miami, I'm born and raised in the United States, and I've lived here primarily my whole life. And so I definitely am ready to spread my wings a little bit and spend more time living in other parts of the world, actually living, not visiting, not a week or two, not a month, but spending really deep, meaningful time. I have to say, I'm incredibly excited about places that are just very international, hubs, where there's a lot of energy, a lot of interesting ideas. People are meeting from different parts of the world. But I'm also very interested in spending time in some of the kind of old parts of the world, but also where the population is very young and where there's a lot of opportunity for the future, like Africa, where the population, the average population, the age of the population is so much lower than in North America and in Europe. So I really would like to get a sense of what that looks like and what potentially is on the next kind of in the future for some of those parts of the world as a person to live there. And 10 to 15 years, I definitely want to spend more time really trying to be more actively helping in some capacity. So the consulting world has been wonderful, and we will continue to keep going. Culture Road is growing, and there's a lot of engagement around the idea of communities of practice. But 10 to 15 years, I'd actually like to be in communities, spending time helping to help people kind of integrate what it is that we're learning, and integrate some of the rapid kind of intake of information, some of the major transformations that are happening in the world, and actually spending more time maybe back where I started from, kind of facilitating some of the knowledge sharing and integration work that's associated with just being a human on this planet, and let alone being a leader. So look forward to spending a lot of time exploring the world and exploring ways that I can be of service.
And I mean, I can see how that's a natural part of your journey too, right? Of equity, diversity, inclusion, EDI. And because when you experience different cultures and different perspectives, that just broadens, right? And it's good for your family as well. So now the last question is about what are your recommendations to the audience? So what nuggets do you want to, it's like E-code or something, what would you like to leave to the audience now?
I think from an audience point of view, and this is something that we talked about earlier, and you opened with it beautifully, that equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's everywhere. It's not a vertical, it's a horizontal. And even just labeling it equity, diversity, and inclusion is too small, right? There really are so many parts of the experience that we have as in this thing called life that are connected to each other. And so I encourage the audience to continue to learn and think about who we are, where we come from, how we came to be who we are, in ways that allow us to have an authentic first person voice around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and around how it is that I want to show up in the world. This isn't about helping other people or hitting some measures for some, dashboard. This is really about us becoming the version of ourselves that is really meant for our next chapter, and also creating space for others to do that as well. I'd also encourage, especially those people in the audience who are decision makers, to think about how it is that you continue to invest in your own, and also create space and opportunities for people around you to continue to learn. That the world is just continuing to shift. It's complicated. We need shared language. We need shared measures. We need and we need a path that can help us feel incentivized, motivated to continue learning, and that's sustainable, not episodic, and that does not dry up when something else trendy happens. So make this our own personal work, and also invest in our own and others' learning in ways that allow us to continue to be ready for the important transformation that we're experiencing right now.
And you live it. You live your advice.
I try. I feel like the best I can do is start with me, and then from there create space from others. But I definitely try.
DeEtta, thank you for coming in. You're doing just amazing, outstanding work. You're having amazing, outstanding impact. You're executing. You're not just talking about your passion, your mission, your work. You're actually doing it on a daily basis. And there's so much to, and I mentioned this earlier, you're this beacon for the world. So people need to follow your work and to support it. It's just marvelous. So thank you for sharing so much today in our dialogue.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I consider you to be quite a beacon, and I am so honored to be here with you today. And thank you for creating space.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.